Education, innovation and trade top agenda as President Buhari meets Governor General of Canada.
INEC clarifies position on House of Assembly by-election and APC primaries in Rivers State.
Secretary to the Government of the Federation reads Riot Act to heads of agencies.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on population explosion in Nigeria.
Now, growth is a constant, it's a required constant in nature. And in the case of population growth, the natural tendency is towards increase as well.
Well, an accelerating birth rate, a decrease in infant mortality, and a rise in life expectancy most times would lead to unregulated and staggering growth in the population figures, the type that obviously concerned persons have drawn attention to with regard to Nigeria's population, which they now regard as a demographic time bomb. And one of such concerned persons, of course, is the country's Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo, whose recent comments stirred the waters on the country's burgeoning population.
Yes, Nigeria's population more than tripled from 41 million in 1955 to over 185 million in 2018. Figures attributed to various population census and projections by the population agencies.
Now, Nigeria's population managers insist that the current population growth rate, which is not less than 3% and therefore translates to some 7 million births annually, is quite high, and that it represents 19% of all births on the continent of Africa and 6% of births worldwide.
These issues have over time pointed to the need for a review of the country's population policy, and Vice President Osinbajo's comment last week brought attention to the staggering population growth in Nigeria.
Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says, however, that plans are on to reduce the population growth rate through collective efforts, adding that if not properly managed, Nigeria might become the third most populous country in the world by year 2050, with young persons making up some 60% of that number.
Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed, who also voiced fears on the issue, however, explained that government is currently encouraging child spacing as a first step to hopefully reversing the trend.
Well, in the meantime, Health Minister Professor Isaac Adewale says that Nigeria requires over 230 billion naira to control the population growth rate. And he says also that the country's contraceptive prevalence requires a boost, adding that the current birth rate of 5.5 children per woman is relatively high.
You know, Kingsley, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, projects that Nigeria's population is to rise from over 206 million in 2020 to over 410 million in 2015.
All right, now what are the economic issues in an exploding population growth rate? Now, some school of thought would argue that the population growth should not be viewed as an entirely negative development, especially if the growth enhances the economy. But they insist that a huge population that is heavily dependent on government could be a gross disadvantage.
So how should Nigeria handle this current population explosion? What factors are responsible for the current population figure? What measures should be in place to reverse the current growth?
All right, now we will have guests and experts in the field of population and population issues to discuss, how to halt the trend that Nigeria is tending towards. That's to say, population growth rate and the population figure that obviously could be a demographic nightmare. They'll be joining us in our conversation segment on Good Morning Nigeria, which is reaching you as always on Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. We are right here at the Abuja headquarters studios, and my name is Kingsley Osadolo. I welcome you to today's edition of the program.
And I am Femi Okewo, thanking you for joining us on this edition of the program. As usual, expect our companion segments, which include newspaper review, business, sports, foreign and entertainment news. But first, let's take highlights of the day's news from Rhoda Anona. Good morning, Rhoda.
Good morning, Femi. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria. Now, Nigeria and Canada have resolved to explore and exploit the abundant opportunities that exist between the two countries towards deepening and enhancing their highly beneficial relations in critical economic sectors. This formed part of highlights of the high-level talks between President Muhammadu Buhari and the Governor-General of Canada. The Canadian Governor-General is being accompanied on the visit by senior government officials, members of the business community who met with President Muhammadu Buhari and his delegation comprising ministers behind closed doors. Their discussions centered on areas of common interest, including education, innovation, trade, culture, sports, and security.
Is Canada's largest trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa. And as well, Nigeria is the largest investor from Africa in Canada. The number of Canadian companies doing business here have grown significantly in recent years, and we really hope that this delegation will foster even more trading and commerce between our two countries. And it's more essential and important than ever that we collaborate to make sure that we leave this planet in good state.
And with the Canadian Governor-General embarking on several trips to space a couple of times, it's not surprising that Nigeria's National Space Research and Development Agency, NASRA, is of interest to her. She was at NASRA where she described space exploration as a catalyst for social, economic and technological development.
Every nation that has remote sensing satellite will provide data. Whoever has the satellite at the time when that happens will provide the data so that the authorities and the law enforcement can provide help as soon as possible. Nigeria is in that group.
But we know that through space science and technology, we will be in a position to have positive impact on so many aspects of our economy.
President Muhammadu Buhari has described as saddening that the nation's infrastructure was left to rot between 1999 and 2014, despite what he called the humongous resources at the disposal of the country during the period. This was while receiving the outgoing British High Commissioner to Nigeria, Paul Ackroyd, in a farewell audience. President Buhari met outgoing British High Commissioner, the members of the joint United Nations African Union and ECOWAS Good Office mission for elections. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, has advised the chairman of governing boards of chief executives of parastatals to work in harmony and within the laws of Nigeria for the good of the nation or face sanctions. This was at an induction program for the governing board members of parastatals in Abuja.
Categorically, let me state this. Governing boards do not have the powers to suspend or remove a chief executive appointed by the president without recourse to due process. You might, however, articulate infractions, investigate wrongdoings.
Hopefully, the threat by the Nigerian workforce to embark on industrial action may be averted. The government side of the tripartite committee set up by the federal government on the new minimum wage held a special meeting this Monday, and that's towards finalizing the position of all stakeholders. Chairman of the Economic Management Team and Vice President of the country, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, earlier had a closed-door meeting with some of the members. Some of them include the governors of Zamfara, Osun, Kebbi, and Plateau states, urging them to persuade others to make their offers known for further actions on the new national minimum wage. The meeting will continue today. The committee is expected to meet with the Governors Forum for further deliberations. The governors are yet to come up with a figure for the new minimum wage, and this is regarded as one of the lingering factors in resolving the issue of the national minimum wage with the workers' union.
We had a very fruitful meeting, which will necessitate the governors having further meeting. And chairman is here. It's mandated by the Vice President, His Excellency the Vice President, to go on with the meeting.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has given reasons for the conduct of by-elections into the Rivers State House of Assembly and position of INEC on the Supreme Court ruling on APC primaries in Rivers State.
What we are going to do in Rivers, similar to what we have done in Rivers before, is to engage with the stakeholders before we fix a date to conduct the elections in Port Harcourt 3. I want to assure you that no constituency in Nigeria will be left unrepresented.
And finally, the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, says the Bureau for Public Enterprises has drafted 8 reform bills for competition in the transport sectors and consumer protection, as well as the postal sector, which has been approved by the Federal Executive Council and transmitted to the National Assembly. The Minister stated this at a stakeholders interactive forum in Lagos.
That is why it has become very necessary for us to do what we can do to ensure that the committee lives up to its responsibilities by ensuring that we identify and maintain regular contacts with various stakeholders and opinion leaders.
And that does it on the news highlights for this morning. I'll be back at 10 for the news at 10. For more news, stay with us here on the NTA. Femi and Kingsley will be back with Good Morning Nigeria just after this break, so stay with us.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem frontally through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive, Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Your favorite Maggi star now wears a new look. Its great taste and quality still remain the same. With Maggi, every woman is a star.
Maggi!
What's up?
His friends didn't come.
Hey, let's practice.
But you're going out.
Don't worry about me.
Nothing satisfies a mother more than seeing a child grow up. But I know as he sweats, he'll face the risk of germs which can cause skin irritation.
That's why you need the new best ever Dettol Cool. Its new advanced formulation with extra menthol protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs and gives your family icy cool freshness.
Growing up needs Dettol protection.
You in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. Girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. It's you. Dry throat. Strepsils. Hello in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils. Strepsils. Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
NTA Television College, Jos, an affiliate of Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, is organizing a 2-week course in Archival Management System of Broadcast Media. Date, 5th to 16th November 2018. Venue, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos. Course fee, 100,000 naira per participant, accommodation inclusive. The course will equip participants with the techniques of automating recordings, cataloging, and analyzing media for storage and productions. Come and take advantage of this course to sharpen your skills in maintaining, conserving, and utilizing the archival system. For more information, please contact us on the following numbers: 0806 980 9807, 0803 314 4383. TV College Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
You're welcome back. Taxpayers advocate unified tax laws and systems to stamp out multiple taxation in the country. More on this on Business News with Comfort Amadou.
We start with tax issues as financial experts call on the federal government to pay more attention to issues bordering on multiple taxation in the country. They equally appeal to the federal government to harmonize tax laws at all government levels to reduce the burden of multiple charges on taxpayers as well as sustain investment inflow into Nigeria.
We advocate for what we call the consolidated tax law, in which the state and the local government will have a single tax code which identify a state and local government revenue officer to be an officer of the same agency. So whoever is collecting in this local government is collecting on behalf of the state.
And now stakeholders in the investment, entrepreneurs, private and public sectors have continued to call on government to encourage more businesses, implementation of policies and financing of small businesses, particularly in the rural communities, for self-sufficiency and in a way generate revenue.
Even banking systems to make it more inclusive for rural people. The only way is to ensure that you at least bill people. If you do not have a band for pricing, it is difficult to find entrepreneurs who will go into that business.
They maintain that entrepreneurship remains the key to unlocking economic development in the country and also emphasize the need to train a new generation of entrepreneurs in delivering opportunities, job creation and social impact on the continent.
You should look at creating solution to a particular problem. That is where streams of income come from. If we are looking forward to leadership, it's something we actually really need to address.
We now take a look at closing figures of trade on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange on Monday. And with that, we conclude business news. I'm Comfort Amodu. Many thanks for watching.
All right, thank you very much, Comfort Amodu, for the business package. Next for us now, we'll take a look at some of the headlines in some of today's newspapers.
Our newspaper reviewer is here with us already. Bayo Achoebi, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Femi. Good morning. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you. Femi, let's begin with you.
Yes, let's take the raging issue of minimum wage, and governors are going to have an emergency meeting today. So the New Telegraph takes that on page 4. Federal government governors disagree over minimum wage, and that is a fallout of some of the meetings. But the Punch has it that governors, on the front page, the banner story, governors hold emergency meeting today over minimum wage, and then says FG seeks common ground with states to stop the November 6th strike. Also, on the top part of the nameplate of the newspaper, we have Obasanjo, Yar'Adua, Jonathan did nothing on infrastructure. That is President Buhari saying that. And next to that is Fayemi mourns as shot Ekiti lawmaker dies in hospital. Next to that is also boards have no power to suspend CEOs of parastatals. That's the secretary to the government of the federation. Other stories on the front page of the Punch. Below the picture stories are the story of the plane crash in Indonesia. 189 die as Indonesia plane crashes into sea. Other smaller stories below that front page is Kaduna killings, military deploys fighter aircraft, special forces to Kaduna. Those are the stories on the front page of the Punch. Bayo.
Yes, human interest, let's look at the plane that crashed yesterday. A plane took off in Indonesia yesterday. 13 minutes after flight, it plunged into the sea. It was about 189 passengers, and none of them survived. Sadly, the 737 MAX Boeing is said to be this crash is the first for the 737 MAX aircraft. It is said to be the most fuel efficient. So far, everybody in the aviation industry is puzzled about the crash, and investigation are still going on. But meanwhile, the 189 bodies and personal effects of the passengers are being retrieved 15 kilometers away from sea. Now the issue of... are
you leaving just before you leave the issue of the plane crash in Indonesia?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in Indonesia is buffeted by natural disasters. It belongs to the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, and is therefore prone to earthquakes, tsunamis, and now you're having this air crash, 189 persons. Now, the intriguing aspect of this crash, as you said, is a Boeing 737 MAX airliner, is that it's a brand new aircraft.
Yes.
Brand new aircraft, and it's just been in use for just about 3 months or so, according to some reports. And therefore, but there was another report indicating that the airline in one previous flight had some technical issues. Perhaps those issues were not resolved. Now, the pilot was actually making an air return at the time it plunged, the aircraft plunged into the sea. It's a pretty sad one. I mean, ordinarily you would imagine that it is older aircraft, usually above 20 or more, as we used to have in Nigeria, older aircraft that are prone to crashes of this nature. But it's a brand new one, just recently commissioned, and unfortunately this had happened.
Yes, since the air pilot was having a return, apparently he had noticed something was wrong and he was trying to, for safety, to return to the airport. But unfortunately, he didn't make it. Mayday, but he didn't make it. Sadly, but if you recall, around that same ring, that was where the Malaysian aircraft disappeared. And it took several years.
The Malaysia to China, that's...
for several months before debris of it were discovered somewhere very close to Australia.
Australia, no, somewhere in Madagascar or so off the coast. And of
One
course,
part in Australia, another part in
nothing
along
has
just
been
the
heard.
Pacific Ocean.
Nothing has been heard of what actually happened.
Yes.
MH370, that's the crash that occurred. So, Bayo, you were going to talk about the minimum wage, I believe.
Yes, the minimum wage is a matter of concern to the National Economic Council. There was an emergency meeting yesterday that was held, and no decision was reached, but Chairman Governors Forum assured that today governors will take a firm decision. There's disparity between the amounts that is being demanded. Labor had come from 65,500 to 30,000, which organized private sector has agreed. Federal government is still at 24,000. State government at 20,700. But you require an agreement. These are the crises that it's not easy to resolve. Labor is firm saying that 18,000 cannot take the worker home. And sadly, it's a paradox. Nigerian public service is said to have one of the lowest wage in the world. And ironically, the Nigerian political class, particularly the bicameral legislature, is said to have one of the highest wage bills in the world. Why is it that the poorest, the lowest civil servant always suffer salary arrears and non-payment? The highest paid politicians don't suffer any such salary payment. However, if you look at the economy of the states, do they have the capacity to pay? We can take two examples. For instance, in Kogi State, the wage bill, as at now, is about 4.48 billion. They still have, at least at now, about 2 months arrears they still owe, they have not paid. If you take 30,000 as a minimum wage, it means a 60% increase. Therefore, that state will end up with a wage bill of about 7 billion, when currently it cannot pay 4.4. Benue is another example. Its wage bill, until it was pruned down, was about 8.2, but when they pruned it down, it came to about 7.9 because they eliminated the ghost workers. If you increase it by 60%, what situation are you placing Benue State? So there are several examples across the board, but there's no gain saying the fact that the worker is done in because his wage cannot take him off.
That's right, but just beyond the issue of wages, we also have to consider the macroeconomic environment.
Yes.
What are the indices showing us? I mean, if you don't tackle some of the macroeconomic challenges, whether you pay minimum wage of 100,000 or otherwise, virtually at some point will become a wage that cannot take you home, or a pay that will be inadequate. So it's those macroeconomic issues that we should continue to tackle, and we know what the indices are, and then, of course, what rates that we have to address. But let's take a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust newspaper, below the nameplates, and indeed all of the stories on the front page of the Daily Trust. NHIS, that's the National Health Insurance Scheme. Boards lack power to suspend CEOs of agencies. That's according to the federal government. Details on page 3. Also on page 3, 2019, era of just awarding votes over, Buhari says. And 15 public firms failed to remit 8.1 trillion naira in 5 years. That's page 17. Lead story, it's on the soldiers and Shiites clashes that have been taking place for a while now in and around the FCT. It says soldiers and Shiites clash again in Abuja. Many feared killed. And you can see the photograph there on the gridlock on the Inyanya Expressway in Abuja yesterday. That occurred in the afternoon and then right up onto the evening hours. Shiites and soldiers clash again in Abuja. Many feared killed. And below that photograph, 3 headlines. Bayo already talked about the minimum wage. And then you have one of the headlines here. I will defeat Buhari and Atiku, Ezekwesili says. That's on page 13. And then listing plans plagued by CBN and AGF issues. That's according to NTA. Ayo.
Yes. Well, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation has observed that there are indications that when boards of organizations, when they are incepted, tend to involve themselves in the day-to-day activities of the agencies, which is far beyond their mandate. And he says their role is to provide policy direction and implementation of programs for the mandate of the agencies they superintend over. The boss, Mustafa, observed that interference by board chairmen in the day-to-day activities of the agencies is not part of their mandate. There is also the blatant disregard for external regulation guiding board meetings. He advised that issuing directives to staff without recourse to the chief executive officer undermines the authority of the CEO. He also pointed out that imposing disciplinary measures on chief executives without recourse to the procedure is also wrong. He pointed out that approval for supervising authorities and using labor unions to distract a parastatal should be discouraged. He warned that board members should follow due process. This was during an inauguration of the boards of federal medical centers and other agencies. So, handwriting is on the wall about the ongoing crisis at the NHIS. Therefore, a board may not be in the position to suspend a chief executive officer without recourse to the supervising authority. For termination of appointment, the appointing authority is the only one that has the authority to terminate.
Without recourse to due process,
supervising authority and due process. The supervising authority is the minister.
Okay.
The chief executive officer of a parastatal is appointed exclusively by the president. And most often than not, it is through the office of the minister. Okay. That is the supervising minister.
Bayo, I think that what we are seeing here reflects a deep crisis, if you like, in the corporate governance of government agencies, whether at the state level or at the federal level. What is the corporate governance code for government agencies? From what has been said, the stories that have been reported and so on and so forth, how then do you draw the organogram? What is the role of the board of directors? I agree that you have seen some boards that have been overbearing, overreaching themselves, and then participating in the day-to-day management. That is wrong. Clearly it is wrong. But on the issue of appointment and discipline and removal, suspension, by the way, is not the same thing as a sack.
No.
All right? But how then do you design the organogram? What are the reporting lines? To whom does the CEO of a government agency report? What is the role of the board? Is it only to be awarding contracts? You are talking about policy. Now, if you formulate a policy and the CEO, for instance, is not abiding by the policy formulated by the board, what is the recourse of the board? So I think that these are issues that need to be clarified. I mean, the government will need from time to time to spell out what the corporate governance code is for government entities. And I think it's important because if private companies, they do that. I mean, publicly quoted companies, they do it. And incidentally, also for self-regulatory organizations, they also have their corporate governance code. So I think that this is a matter that needs to be clarified because you might then get into a situation where if the CEO of a government agency feels that, well, listen, I can bypass the board and the board can do nothing to me, then, of course, he begins to act on the frolic of his own. What happens in that case?
In fact, that was why the public service reform was there to brief members of the board in the sense that it was to put them in the right perspective of the policy direction of government. That is to say, the role of the board is primarily advisory on the basis of policy. The board basically has no role to play in awarding contracts. If the agency decides about a contract, the role of the board is to advise about the necessity of the contract. There is a procurement procedure for which the chief executive officer, as an accounting officer, presides over. The board has no role at all to play there.
Bayo, see, when all of this controversy arose, there was something that occurred. Universities have governing councils.
Yes.
What is the power of governing councils over the staff of universities, including the vice-chancellor? That's one issue. Details that they will need to sort out. And the issue is less of policy than governance, corporate governance. How is that entity run? If you formulate a policy and the management, the board is not part of the management, and the management is not carrying out the policy, what is the recourse of the board? And more importantly, what is the responsibility and liability of a board of governors or a governing board? What is their responsibility? What is their liability?
I think I agree with you that all these nuances need to be sorted out so that we have less conflict within the system.
That's right.
Yes, we'll go to the editorials now, but there's one issue that concerns many Nigerians. Many Nigerians travel with night bus and these luxurious buses. And there's front page of the Punch, accident, young shall grow, asked to compensate victims' families. That's a very big issue that must be put on hold. And then the presidential panel exposes fraudulent leasing of Abuja land. Those are two major stories that in the coming days we shall be following. And then editorial.
The editorial is from Daily Sun. It's on page 15. The Daily Sun, it says new minimum capital for microfinance banks.
Well, yes, the central bank has provided a new guideline for new minimum rates for these banks. In fact, last month, the central bank issued notices about revocation to about 154 microfinance banks, 6 primary mortgage banks, and 22 finance companies. This is part of the measures by the bank to sanitize it. Now, a new standard has been issued for them. There's going to be an increase for unit microfinance banks from 20 million to 200 million. Those of state microfinance bank is from 100 million to 1 billion, while those of the national microfinance bank is from 2 billion to 5 billion. The whole aim is to ensure that they are well on sound and are able to function effectively. This has a deadline of 1st April 2020, so there is time for them now to gather enough resources, either through seeking further capital to enhance their status or go into measures to survive if they are not able to meet that deadline. And it will go a long way in strengthening the socio-economic status of the microfinance bank to help the socio-economic development in the nation.
All right, Bayo Atoyobi, I would like to thank you for being with us today. See you tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria still. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll deal with our topic for conversation this morning.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Who am I? I'm a caregiver, a slayer,
Gifted,
a boss lady, a foodie. I am the chief quality inspector and chief organizer. And when I'm cooking with my Maggie Star, I become a kitchen grand master.
Every day, you choose to make the difference. That's why you choose Maggie Star, made from natural soya beans and other carefully selected ingredients to help you cook the difference.
I am the Chief Enjoyment Officer, and I'm the magnet that brings my family together. Need I say more? But best of all, I love what I do.
With Maggie, cook the difference.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual.
For the three put.
You're welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah.
You take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobu to come to chocolate rice of made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It boosts our economy and give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture. Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
Caring for the patients of typhoid and diarrhea is our responsibility. And these illnesses are often spread due to eating with unclean hands. So I recommend Dettol, as it protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs. That's why I want to be Dettol sure. Dettol, the 100% sure.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
Move now! The red light won't kill you! Move now!
To dey disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say I no go dey do them again, because change begins with me.
Let's cross the other side of the road.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge, because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. If you want carry me past where they go.
Make they stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop, because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Let's start off our discussion on population growth or explosion in Nigeria by taking this background report from Kunle Adeyeye.
The population of any country is expected to rise with time, but when this occurs out of proportion, it results to population explosion. This scenario can be likened to the current state of Nigeria's population. It has been reported that Africa's largest economy's population is currently 3 times more than what it was in 1960 when the country became independent. Nigeria's population stood at 45.1 million in 1950, but has steadily risen to an estimated 200 million, growing at about 3% annually. Postulations by demographers and economists have suggested that Nigeria might become the 3rd most populous country by 2050 if the trend remains unchecked. Experts have explained that a large population translates into bigger markets for goods and services, enhances a country's ability to defend its national interests, and strengthen its bargaining power at international level. This has made the federal government to equally raise some concerns over the country's population, which seems to defy these positives. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo and the Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed at the recent economic summit in Nigeria admitted that Nigeria's population needs to be managed to achieve maximum economic gains. The Vice President said Nigeria must act with urgency to build an economy that can support the population, create jobs, and other economic opportunities, as well as improve education and the healthcare system. So what is the remedy for Nigeria population control or population management? China, India, and the United States of America are more populous than Nigeria and have utilized their population by focusing on human capital development. Is Nigeria's current population figure a blessing or otherwise to the country? What are the requirements for population control and management?
All right, thank you very much, Kunle Adeyeye, for that background. We have guests with us in the studios to discuss this issue in greater detail. First, would like to welcome from the National Population Commission, Usman Maruf Kolapo. He is a population statistician and currently acting director of Census. Mr. Kolapo, pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Nigerians.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios, a familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria, is an associate professor of economics at the University of Abuja. It's also former director of National Planning Commission, Dr. Nazifi Dama. Dr. Dama, pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning, Nigerians.
Okay.
We also have here with us in the studio Dr. Ejike Oji. Is of the IPAS, but he has actually switched over now. He's on a population special assignment. Dr. Oji, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
And still with us in the studio, we have the acting Nigeria representative of the United Nations Population Fund, Dr. Eugene Konya. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, gentlemen, pleasure to have you with us. Unfortunately, we appear not to be gender sensitive in discussing this topic this morning, but regardless, we'll just fire on. By recalling statements that have been made in recent times with regard to Nigeria's burgeoning population figures, there are estimates that Nigeria is now not less than 198 million and pushing 200, by the way. And some persons are beginning to express concern that indeed we might be having a demographic liability on our hands. The numbers used to be positive in terms of markets and so on and so forth, but considering the pressures that we're having all around, together, of course, with the economics of the country, then there are issues to be concerned about, they say. What is your view? Let's begin with the population statistician. That's the acting director of Census at the National Population Commission, Mr. Kolapo.
Yeah, thank you. The analysis done is very perfect. I will agree with that. And actually, people will talk about demographic dividend, which is an output, because a dividend is something that comes out of a process. But as of today, you said maybe you have is a population, maybe there are some limitations and all other things. Currently, our population is about between 198 to 200 million, as you have said, which is very huge. People will compare, and you were comparing India, China, and America. But if you look at it, if you put Nigeria geographically inside America, you will discover that it's just about 1 or 2 states, maybe 3 states that it will occupy. So even if comparing them, even with the same resources and all other things, you will discover that if we are to be on the same standard, if Nigeria, if America should have 300 million population, then Nigeria shouldn't go beyond 50 by now. Even with the same resources, with the same technology, with the same thing for us to increase and have the same set of standard of living. Let's assume we have the same technology. That is when you are comparing on this note, because people used to compare, some have 1 billion and all of that things. You must compare their resources, you must compare resources including land, technology, and all of that things. But the major problem I would just say we should look at in terms of the danger, it's not about the population alone, but the rate of increase of the population. That should be the main concern for us. India, China, America are not growing at the rate we are growing. They are far, far growing lesser than we are. And that is why we are saying by 2050, we overtake so many of them. Because if we are going at this rate of about 3.2%, fertility rate about 5.5, that is an average of 5.5 children per a woman in this life birth period, is very great compared with those that have what we call replacement level, like Britain, America, and all other things that has maybe about 2 or 2 point something per woman. So if we are going at this rate, the problem is definitely there, because I'm not an economist, but the reality is that our economic growth, our resources, including technology and all other things, are not growing at that pace at which our population is growing. A typical example, if government says he has created 4 million jobs this year, some people say, where is it? It might be the truth, but you may not see it. The reason why you may not see it is that, take for example, in Nigeria, that is adding about 4 million population every year to the population. If you mop up 2 million, 3 million, you still have an excess. And that is why even if you double the spending in maybe 20 years from now, you might not even improve the life of the Nigerians. Because doubling the spending and the population has gone beyond the doubling, is more than double, then you cannot even meet the current standards. Between 2006 and now, we have had an increase of more than 50 to 60 million people added to the population of Nigeria. We are talking about 140 million in 2006, and we are now estimating even, let's put it at 190. If you remove it, that is 50 million additional. Those people that were in government were managing 140 million. Currently, they are managing 190 or 198 million. More than 58 million people have added to it, including those that have exited by death or by migration. Those that have come in, their needs has to be taken care of. And that's why we say, if we need to manage it, and we need to manage the rate at which we are growing. And let me also add that at the current rate of the population and the distribution, the size and distribution, because it's not only the size alone, the distribution, Nigeria is a very young population with more population at the youth level between the age of 0 to 15. And that is why you have the mothers of tomorrow. The mothers of tomorrow are already here. If Nigerian women decide to give birth to only one this year and next year and the next 10 years, Nigerian population will continue to grow. Because if 40 million people decide to add one person to the population, that is 40 million. How many people will die or how many people will migrate? Maybe 10 million. So you are adding another 30 million to it in the next maybe 10 years, even if you decide to go by one. So the population will continue to grow, but the rate at which it's growing is what we must check.
Dr. Ejike, let me come to you, because you are the chairman of the Association for the Advancement of Family Planning. And I know that possibly as this program tries to solve a problem, family planning too, you have been in the society. You know the difficulty of reaching the people you want to reach, the elites and the common people. When we talk about population explosion, the elites, in my opinion, possibly are easier to even talk to. The local population, how do they key into this? In your studies, who are the people who are the sources of this population explosion?
Yeah. Thank you, Femi. First of all, I want to agree with
our brother from the National Population Commission. For us, we feel that we're in a demographic crisis already. And then if you look at why demographers will say you're in a crisis, there are three key things. One is you have a very youthful population. 45% of our population is below the age of 15. 60% of our population is below the age of 30. That's a very young population. And it's called dependent population. And then the second one, if you have high rate of immigration from your country to other countries, if you look at skilled labor immigration, you wouldn't so complain because $27 billion come into this country from diaspora and economy. But the one that is worrying is the immigration of non-skilled people. I remember in 2006, I was in Norway on the invitation of the Norwegian government when they were trying to craft their reproductive health policy for Africa. One of the key things the International Development Minister asked me, Dr. Oche, how come every single day 13 commercial sex workers come into their country from Nigeria? 14% of all the people who cross the tempestuous sea of the Mediterranean to seek for greener pastures in Europe, we hear is about are Nigerians. We were shouting, nobody listened, until recently we saw plane loads of Nigerians being brought back from Libya. Then the third one is when nationals are killing nationals. Remember, it started in 2004, OPC in the southwest, militancy in the Niger Delta. Some of us were shouting, nobody listened. Then came kidnapping in the southeast. We are shouting, I'm from the southeast. For almost 4 years, I didn't go home. Because once you put up a amount of this and you want to build a house, they'll come for you. We were shouting, nobody listened. Then came the religious crisis on the plateau. I remember one gentleman, a senator, then called me when they said, Dr. Oje, are you a prophet of doom? Because I went around the country and I was talking about these issues. I said, I'm not. Just look at, use societal imperatives. You can make some deductive reasoning and know what's going to happen next. And I said, more will come. Came Boko Haram in the northeast. We were still talking about Boko Haram. Now we have the so-called herdsmen killings. And Nigerians are just targeting on herdsmen. It's not herdsmen killing. This is just a symptom. The main reason is that we are overpopulated, like he correctly said. So we need to address it. And that's why in our association, a few of us that were chief of parties of international...
Sorry, can you tie overpopulation to rising violence?
That's what I'm saying.
How can you tie it? I want to see it.
Like I said, there are three main things. I've talked about immigration. I've talked about youthful population. Then nationals killing national. Those are the three things demographers will see, and they will tell you that you're in a demographic crisis. Okay? And then when we saw some of us that are chief of parties of international organizations, so we are tired donors, multilaterals and unilaterals giving us money for our family plan. We need to pay attention and bring our government to understand we are in a crisis. And that's how the Association for the Advancement of Family Planning came into being. And we were able to convince the last administration to put $3 million on the table so that UNFPA and the USAID and DFI, they have been giving us a lot of resources. Let's bring something on the table, show that we're serious. And in this administration, under the leadership of Professor Adewale, we got another additional million, making it $4 million to put in the family planning table for commodities. But you see, the problem we have, or the challenge we have here is yes, the federal government is doing quite a lot. Where the problem is at the sub-national level. The states are just behaving as if they are not supposed to be part of the development process of the country. When you look at the line item in the reproductive health section of any of the states, you can hardly see family planning in it. The federal government procures and distributes to the states, but the last mile concept is where we have the major problem. The states are now supposed to take from their warehouses to the hospitals and make sure it gets to the woman. So you go to that place, you don't see supplies, you don't see consumables, and that is where the problem is. So we are looking at it as a concerted effort by every stakeholder. That's why our meeting that is coming up this December, we are focusing on mobilizing resources at the sub-national level to support issue of family planning.
Dr. Ejike Oje, thank you very much. I recall when we had you on this conversation,
from Lagos.
Yes, you joined us from our Lagos Network studios. That was sometime last year, I believe. I'm not quite sure of the date. Before we get into what remedial actions, effective measures should be taken, I think it's important for us to still sketch, if you like, the broad outlines of the demographic crisis that we face. We listened to Kolapo already. We also listened to Oji, and then, of course, Nazif Dama is waiting for his economic perspective. But before then, Dr. Eugene Cognoy, who is the acting rep of UNFPA Nigeria, what is it that the UNFPA sees with regard to Nigeria's population growth, as well as, you know, the scary numbers that are being bandied around now with regard to what we need to watch out for?
Okay, thank you. Nigeria, as rightly said, has a very large population. From the United Nations perspective, it's not the size that matters. We are not worried about the size. We are worried about the rate with which it is growing. As it is said, the size of Nigerian population is not as big as America or China or India, but it is growing faster than any of these countries. And that rate with which it is growing it is growing faster than the economic growth. That's the problem. It means that people are getting poorer. Because if the economic growth is growing slower than the population, then every year you get poorer and poorer. That's one problem. And when people are getting poorer and poorer, that will lead to the problem that Dr. B has just said. It will lead to crisis, it will lead to migration, it will lead to problems of urbanization, it will lead to... No one is happy. When people are not happy, we see what we are seeing now. Another problem of rapid population growth is because there are no opportunities in rural areas, they tend to migrate to cities. Nigerian population will double every 20 to 26 years, it will double, but in cities, it may be doubling every 10 years. And suppose you are the government in a city where the population is doubling every 10 years, it means that even if you double the resources every 10 years, people will feel that you have not done anything. You ask this government, you have not done anything. We are not feeling it. Yeah,
that's right.
We are not feeling it. If you increase the number of doctors, increase the number of teachers, double them every 10 years, they will still not feel. And if you don't double, then the education system is falling. People go, they are packed in class, children they don't have the quality education they deserve. The health system is collapsing because of that. And we find that the next problem that we are facing in terms of population is the age structure. I've mentioned the rate with which it is growing, and the next problem is the population structure, the age structure. The age structure of Nigerian population is young. It is dependent population, hugely dependent, with fewer people at the working age and are taking care of this huge amount of children. And it means that the living standard cannot be there. We don't feel, because you work and you are taking care of almost everybody out there. We want a population structure where the dependency ratio is better, where there are fewer dependents, and then the life will improve. And that is what we talk about demographic dividend. It only happens when the working age is almost as equal or slightly bigger than the dependent. And then they are able to take and work and save, and life improve, and the whole country get out of poverty. It can happen if a few people are working for a large amount of people. So what do we do in this structure? What the United Nations would recommend is voluntary family planning. People have the right to decide freely and responsibly the number and spacing of children they want. If this happens, almost 30% of Nigerians who want really not to have children, they continue to have, simply because they don't have access to family planning.
Services.
If we just give them, those who want to really just to stop or to space, if we just provide family planning services to them, we will go a long way to improve these issues.
All right, Dr. Koglu, thank you very much. Again, we'll return to you to drill into the measures that we'll need to take to deal with some of these numbers that are quite scary as they are tumbling out. Dr. Nazifi Dama, from your perspective, what are the pertinent issues to worry about and why?
Well, it is simply impossible to extricate our being tagged the headquarters of poverty of the world with a rising population that is extremely dependent. It is a problem that has been hampered upon for too long a period of time, but we seem to be living and continuing in an opportunistic development strategy perspective, and I will expatiate on this. If a head of a house has a wife and has 2 or 3 children, and he is expecting the woman to give birth to 2 additional children or 3, he knows that in 3 to 5 years, the 2-bedroom flat may not be too sufficient for him. At individual level, that person may end up planning to get maybe a 3 or 4-bedroom flat so that the family can have a comfortable living. A nation of 180 million people undertaking developmental interventions in a blinded manner without carefully using the demographic figures and the necessary statistics to plan for developmental intervention across every sector of the economy, we are only allowing for disaster to happen. Every single mouse that is born in Nigeria requires a given quantity of calorie of food to survive, require a minimum number of liters of water to use per day, require access to health facility, require access to education, require certain amount of megawatt of electricity to use. And these are economic imperatives, and they don't just happen. Government at all levels have to plan for this to happen. And unfortunately, we have abandoned the culture of planning, and that is why we are seeing what we are seeing today. The competition for economic resources arising from expanded population will continue. The so-called crisis, whether it is ethnic or whether it is religious, is a manifestation of a deep-rooted problem arising from an expanding population that is not properly planned for and without requisite national planning culture to be able to provide adequate social services, but importantly, economic opportunities for a rising population to be productively engaged and therefore dissuade its mind from engaging in social biases and fabricated ethnic and religious crises. And I think if we understand the issues from this perspective, I think it will be important for us, to all of us, but importantly, as some of my colleagues have said, for the subnational entities, states and local governments to partner with the federal government towards working as a team so that we can be able to know exactly what is the requirement per our population in terms of access to health, how many doctors do we need per every ratio of population, how many additional schools do we require to build, what is the teacher-pupil ratio, how many additional roads do we require, what is the quantity of water required by 190 million population, what is the adequate food calorie and its combination to facilitate healthier living that is required, what is the existing population density in our country, What is the level of urbanization? What is the rate of urbanization expansion? What is the concomitant additional developmental resources required for an expanding population, but importantly, for the growing urbanization, which is projected to reach around 70% by the year 2050. So I think it is important we see this problem as a national problem that is not just the responsibility of the federal government, but the responsibility of every Nigerian. Once we are able to identify what are the key problems and working as a team, then we can be able to sit down and fashion enduring strategies for us to go back. But the most important thing is for us to be able to know every single aspect of the demographic characteristics, what it entails in terms of problems, and what are the opportunities associated with it, and then working as a team to exploit the opportunities and to mitigate the problems.
Well, now, we're already going into planning and how to get our society organized and prepare for an incoming generation. But the rate of birth, the uncalculated, unplanned rate of birth in Nigeria now is such that can government plan for a man who just for every intercourse, it must be a baby? How can government plan for that?
Well, yes. in reality, if you look at the issues, we economists, we are extremely alarmed because the last quarter expansion of GDP is just 1.5%. And our population is growing, as alluded by our colleague, at the rate of around 3.2. Now, at any point in time, for any country, if the rate of expansion in national income, which is GDP, is below the population expansion, be rest assured that poverty will be accentuated. So the most important thing is, as a country, as a nation, as elites, as leaders who have benefited immensely from a very good, robust planning culture of what others do, how do we expand our economy? How do you create economic opportunities? How do we reduce the poverty? But importantly, how do we use every single communication strategy available to us in order to slow down the 3.2 expansion? Even if it is slowed down by 1%, you will be able to see that tens of millions in terms of reduction in our population will be achieved. Because if you look at some comparator countries that we use, for example, it is India, it is China, their population expansion is extremely low. The question is, what are the set of policies they have used to make them to succeed? How do we domesticate such policies? Or what are the specific innovative policies can we be able to bring in Nigeria that are in line with our cultural, religious, and whatever peculiarities in order to slow down this demographic disaster that we are seeing and is unfolding?
Dr. Dama, thank you very much. Just before, Femi, just before we bring in Kolakbo and Orji into this conversation, I'm sure Nigerians themselves would have experienced this. If you take a base year, say 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, look at the city the city that you are familiar with, or the city that you have lived in. And you can imagine the pressure, the human pressure that you are seeing in the cities today. You can see it in terms of the number of vehicles on the road, the number of human beings, you have to encounter, and even the journey times, the travel times. Sometimes you say, okay, I normally do this journey, say, in 30 minutes. These days, you find that you are doing it in an hour and a half. That is 3 times the regular time. You have more vehicles on the road. Not just that the roads are bad. Even when the roads are smooth, the roads have been fixed, you find that your journey times have improved. I give you a typical example. I mean, in the 90s, if I was going to drive, for instance, from Lagos to Benin, it would be 3 hours. 3 hours. I mean, I could calculate and say, look, once you are at the old toll gate, that's in Lagos, at Ijebu-Ode, it will be 1 hour. At Ore, another 1 hour. By the time you get to UBTH, it's another 1 hour. 3 hours. If you did it today in 4 hours, I mean, you have to be at breakneck speed to get that done. But the road is good, it's been fixed, but I'm saying the journey times, you know, have elongated. And then you just find traffic in the city, human beings everywhere you go. You're just seeing people, and as I said, I mean, these are the issues. But how did we achieve this, what is obviously a challenging growth rate of 3.2%? What were the policy gaps? Let's return to the NPC Acting Director of Census.
First, I will agree with the last speaker, because why are we planning? We are not planning for the trees and all other things. Even if we are planning for the trees, we are planning it for our own benefit. That is the first thing we must have. And the next thing is that we must allow the reality to come to bear with the average person in Nigeria, not just the elite. If you look at it, if you concentrate on the elite, you look at a man in Asokoro having a big house, has 3 children, and the gate man will have 15.
That's it.
Because everybody is taking insurance for the future. Why the owner of the building is taking insurance in his wealth, the gate man is taking insurance in the children that I don't know who will become governor tomorrow. But unfortunately, he will overstretch the little resources he has on the 15, and he will not be able to take care of any one of them appropriately. So these are the realities that we must allow people to realize. That if you have 15,000 and you have 15 children, there is no magic, there is no witchcraft, there is nothing you can do. It is an average of 1,000 per child. What will 1,000 naira per child do for you? It's not a witchcraft that is haunting you. It is your resources and the number of children that you have. Then, when you allow people to realize this, it also gives you more burden. Because, take for example, simple malaria, at the first instance, for someone that has little resources but smaller family size, can decide to go and take the drug at the instance, and the thing can go down. But you that have 15 children with the same resources, 15,000, with another person that has 2 children, you may decide not to even care about that malaria until it becomes something endemic. And your resources will not be able to take care of it. That's why they say we are poor because we are poor. One of those things is to enlighten the people. That is campaign. I agree we can bring the contraceptives and all other things. The uptake must also be there, the willingness of the people. And it's for us to allow people to see reality beyond rhetorics and talking theories. Allow people to see the impact. Let me give you a typical example. In 2007, I was delivering, that is analyzing the census for the Northeast, and I was in Bauchi. And we said, Northeast is the least in terms of literacy. Oh, they said, no, it can't be, and all other things. People go to Quranic education and all that. Maybe I said, yes. I said, literacy means ability to read and write with understanding in any language. He said, yes. So it's okay. How many of you that are in this hall, whose children and wife can read and write and say, I'm coming, please wait for me, in Arabic? Don't talk about English. Or if they write it and put it down that my mother has gone to the river, he can read it, and all of that things. They all came to reality that is the situation. Yobe is the least in terms of literacy. Borno was there. And some of all these signals were there. Take, for example, the Boko Haram. Some of us are surprised, but not totally surprised. Take, for example, we knew that Maiduguri was growing at a very high rate, apart from something like Lagos. Not in terms of the volume, the total number, but in terms of the rate at which people were migrating through desertification and all other things. When we did concurrent analysis, look at 1963, look at some villages and all other things, we discovered that some of them, we couldn't see them in 2006 census and 1991 census. They have gone into extinction because of desertification, overgrazing, the footprint of human beings has taken care of that. And people are migrating towards Maiduguri, and it was becoming very large. And the youthful population, as we are talking, is also regional differences are there. We must face reality. And this thing. So immediately this thing was coming up. I said, oh, there is a barrack in quotes of army where people can recruit because you have now moved the youths, unemployed youths,
to the city,
uneducated in quotes, unskilled, into a point. I will call Maiduguri or a city a point. So it is now very easy for someone to recruit easily because you now have an army camp, not the Nigerian army, an army camp. Unlike before when people are scattered all over the rural areas, in which for you to get 10 people into your army, you must maybe traverse about 20, 50 villages. It will not be so. So these are part of the problems when you are having people moving towards the urban and they are not prepared for the urban something. Someone that is not skilled. The urban is a consuming society and it needs mostly skilled laborers. So one of those things I will just say is that first we must avoid the twos, T double zeros. Too early, too early to marry, or giving birth not below the age of 18. Too close, the first child and the second child coming too close, we must avoid it. Too late, we must also avoid it. Giving birth after the age of 35 for a woman and all other things, 40, getting to 40, that is very risky. So if we avoid all these things and we space our children, we don't have baby mothers. When the person giving birth is also growing, is also a baby, and is giving birth. These are things that can lead to this population explosion.
Let's take a look at what we are doing in terms of this advocacy, in terms of this campaign. What is the Population Commission, for instance, doing on the ground in terms of spreading this to the population, the core areas that you really need to get to?
Yes. By the mandate of the Population Commission is to advise government on some of these issues and bring it forward. It goes beyond the Population Commission when it comes to advocacy. Just like Dr. Ejike have said, UNFPA is there. We've developed RAPIDS, that is resource awareness for population in development, develop it, take it. But I would say maybe it is not yet Uhuru. We need to do more to bring the awareness and bring the reality and allow people to realize that whether we like it or not, we need to slow down our speed, because this neck-breaking speed at which we are going will definitely, because you love your children, we all love our children, we must be able to tell the mothers and the fathers that if you love these children, when you bring them, make sure that their future is secured, at least within the human resources and the human intellect, so that you secure their future, so that you should be able to voluntarily control what you bring into this world and be able to put your resources on them effectively. These are some of those things, but something like NTA, you are doing, it's one of those things you are doing right away. People are hearing us and they will understand some of these issues because it goes beyond just policy formulation and all other things. The communication expert must come in and bring this into reality.
All right, Mr. Kolakwa, thank you very much. Dr. Ejike Orji, let me rephrase the question I asked Mr. Kolakwa a while ago, namely the policy and, if you like now, the program gaps that have conduced to our accelerating population growth rate as well as fertility growth rate. And then tie that up with what you were saying earlier as to what appears from your perspective to be the abdication or total neglect by the subnational entities in dealing with what is obviously a demographic crisis in Nigeria.
Yes, thank you. The policy gaps, I would say, I want to situate it on two levels of governance. One at the federal and second at the subnational, we mean states and local governments. At the federal level, during the last but one administration, let me say by the Obasanjo regime, if we take our governmental heads of state perspective, historical perspective, like I said, some of us looked at what was going on. As development experts, we felt that we were abdicating our responsibility as a country, and then as citizens of the country, that we needed to start shouting, as it were. And that's why we decided to form the association. And one of the key things that we did in order to wake up the consciousness of our policymakers, what he did mention, RAPID. RAPID is a tool that you use to, in a very graphic way, show leaders what is going on. And then in that RAPID, you have to do peer review. We peer reviewed Indonesia. If we say it's religion, Indonesia is almost Muslim. Morocco, even Iran. These are Islamic countries. Let's say it's religion. And then you could see Iran, their CPR is 75%.
What is CPR?
Contraceptive prevalence rate. That means if there are 100 women, how many of them are taking modern methods of fertility control? You get the point. Meanwhile, that was less than 10% at the time.
And Iran was 75.
75. You get the point.
So you knock off religion on that,
Thank you. If you say you're a Catholic or a Christian, at the time we were speaking, Italy, where the Vatican resides, is about 60-something%. So nobody can use religion and then weak us. But the important thing is that when we saw this policy gap, we decided, first of all, to encourage government to start putting money on the table. Because they say you put your mouth where your money is. That's why the federal government now started putting money for commodities purchase. But the federal government also did something very novel. They crafted a family planning a blueprint, so to speak, to be able to, which led to the costed implementation plan. How much is it going to cost us to even roll out this? And then developed a communication plan. And then also recently launched it and said the green dot. Anywhere you see the green dots, it means that you can walk in there and get family planning services. But before then, with the encouragement of our association, the federal government made family planning services free in all public sites. But like I said, this is at the federal level. At the state level, we are, because health is on the concurrent list. You get the point. So the federal government cannot prescribe to the states, but they can advise. They can do policies covering the whole country. But the states are not doing the same. This is where the policy gap is. The states are not doing exactly the same. Some of the states, there is an accountability mechanism that I chair. We brought about 18 states to look at what is going on in terms of how much are the states putting in the in their basket for health. At the federal level, we are doing barely 4-point-something instead of 15% that we say we should do as an African nation. But the states, some of them claim they are doing 15%. But we actually looked at how much that was actually being released, was hovering around 4% again. But nothing was going to family planning. So you can see that the problem in terms of policy gap is at the state level. And that's why all our advocacy are going to now. Like I said, in our next meeting, we're making it a major trust to advise the government. And we're also working with the Federal Minister of Health to see how we can get into the Governor's Forum to bring these realities. And I can tell you, I always say, for people who are leading, you need to show them hard facts. In 2006, I decided to see how I can link poverty, maternal deaths to some of these issues. I took a 10-year span, 1996 to 2006, and I was amazed what I saw. In the northeast, or first of all, in the northwest, poverty level was 71%. In the northeast, it was 72.5%. In the north central, it was 64%. In the southwest, it was 35%. No, 36%. In the south-south, 34%. In the southeast, it was 24.5%. When you now look at the fertility levels, in the northeast and the northwest, it was 7.2% fertility rates. Whereas on the average in the south, it was between 4 4.2 to 4.5. When you now look at why are women dying, or where are the deaths occurring, 70% by a Packard study about 10 years ago showed that all the people are dying are below the age of 18. And I kind of liked what Kalak was said about too early, too many. The fourth one is that when you get to the fourth pregnancy, the fifth pregnancy is much more dangerous to the woman than the other 4 pregnancies put together. So you could see the evidence is on the ground. Why is it that our subnational leaders are not paying attention to it? I'm not holding brief for the federal government, but I can tell you we have all the policies generated, we have everything done, and there you can see the continuation of conversation on the issue. Why are the policy
Everybody's thinking of building roads, exactly. Building schools, and then
we're
these
not
ones
developing
they will
the
not be
real
enough.
sector.
Yes.
And then the other thing is that we must as a nation look at, we're talking about demographic dividend. Our vice president is at the top of that. Luckily, he will be able to come to speak in our meeting. Demographic dividend, if you look at all countries, 1,000 years ago, almost every country is at the same level of poverty. Europe, Africa, America. But something happened. They did 4 key things, some of those that have now jumped up like all the Western nations. 1, they reduced maternal mortality. 2, they reduced, they increased life expectancy. But the 2 key most important things they did was that they improved fertility control, that is increased their CPRs, and then at the same time made sure there was good health and invested in their young population.
All right, Dr. Ejike, thank you very much. You perhaps will have the opportunity again when the other guests also will speak to just repeat some of the things you said. The RAPID that we're talking about, that's the comparative analysis, peer review, to say, look, a country like Indonesia, a country like Iran, for instance, and then a country like Italy, where religion is not a factor in the population growth rate, or rather in the birth control measures that have been adopted. If Iran is 70-something% and Nigeria is hovering around below 20, then that's an issue to worry about. Gentlemen, let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation, plus, of course, taking the comments that have come in by way of tweets.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
You're out of forget.
All right, you're welcome back. Our guests, of course, are elaborating in private conversations on the issues that we are talking about, and indeed, the challenges that we face and how to deal with those very critical numbers. Once again, to restate it, Nigeria's rate of population increase annually, according to the NPC guest who is here with us, 3.2%. The fertility rate for each woman is 5.5. These are pretty alarming figures. Nigeria's population is now almost 200 million, and you can see the economic analysis that they have also brought on that. Even if you were to create 5 million jobs today, in another 2 years, you would need to create an additional 7 or 10 million jobs. And the poverty rate, of course, is likely to increase on account of the fact that you have many more mouths to feed. Let's take our tweets now, Femi, that have come in from our viewers.
Yes, Daily Jack Solomon starts with this and says the federal government must play an active role in family planning programs, especially educating rural women about family planning. It should also use the mass media to promote small family size, but government should not dictate family size to prevent unwanted religious and social unrest in Nigeria.
Well, first, Sakimba, we hope Deleja Solomon listened to what Dr. Ejike Oji said, that you have family planning control methods, the higher percentage in countries where you have deep religious practices.
And everybody is always talking about federal government should,
federal government should do that. It mentioned, if it is Catholicism, it mentioned Italy. If it is Islamic religion, it mentioned Iran. Festus Akimboyewa has this next tweet. The rate at which our population is growing is alarming, and government should be bold to tackle it. Since we don't have the resources, money, and infrastructure to support the growing population, there should be restrictions on the number of children women can have in the country.
And now, Engineer Idara Odo, population is a difficult thing to control because when people engage in sex, it is in the hidden. The outcome is what being noticed after some months. Enlightening the masses must go a long way to salvaging the situation.
All right, Musa T. Muha tweets, I don't think high population has any negative effect in this country. That's what he's saying. I hope you listen to what the guests have also been saying. How to engage people in different economic sectors is what we are supposed to focus on.
Okay. And Victor Onyoye says this population issue is something else. While China and some other nations are experiencing decline in population and are now encouraging couples to bear more children, others who have the population are crying. What a paradox.
Donatus Abo, education is key in addressing population explosion. Now, more educated people tend to have fewer children since they always think about expenses.
Yes, Chris Simon, as the population explodes, more jobs, more food and social infrastructure ought to be created. If not, there would be problem.
Well, again, let's repeat what Nazif Zama had explained. I mean, he's Associate Professor of Economics. If your population is growing at a rate faster than the growth of your economy, which is the GDP, then you will continue to have this challenge. Then you have to be playing catch-up with regard to how to improve your economy. Sandy Makalamakoje, it is a good move to regulate our childbirth. However, how do we regulate childbirth of those men who marry 2 to 4 wives? Will government also legislate that a man should not marry more than 1 wife? As we think of regulating population explosion, we should also grow our infrastructure.
Okay. And Kenneth says population explosion in Nigeria is a wake-up call to all Nigerians, and there is every need to work hard in order to meet up all the challenges. On the side of government, I advise that birth control law should be enacted. Thank you. And God bless. Good morning, Nigeria.
This is from a handle that says it's announcer. Our focus should not be just on families, but also on the youth and adolescents because of the rate of unwanted pregnancy outside wedlock. And that's an issue with regard to population growth.
And Alika, to complement, manage and complement the managing of the population, I propose a family of 4, consisting father, mother, and 2 children. Medical awareness is vital to help people give birth to sexes of choice, so we don't have the issues of looking for a particular sex and get more children.
Usman Bani Kanto tweets, it says population explosion in Nigeria is inevitable unless and until the local populace are fully sensitized and educated with regard to population issues. And then, of course, we articulate the resources and other critical matters for our national development. Those are the tweets that we have. I'm sure that we all know those who are, who of course, are seeking to justify this. Nobody's going to pay your children's school fees for you. And then, of course, even if somebody's going to pay that, it's only going to be for a while. If scholarships are going to be offered or bursaries granted, it's only going to be for a while. This is part of what you're having, the challenge you're having with students' accommodation in universities, the inability of schools to absorb the millions of persons who are now applying for admission each year, because the bed spaces are limited, the accommodation is limited, the classrooms are much fewer, and so on and so forth. But let's bring it again, Dr.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Dr. Eugene Cognoy, I mean, what role can UNFPA play much more effectively, considering what appears now to be one of our major national challenges, namely the apparent indifference of the subnational governments? Is there a way the UNFPA can kick its intervention through the subnational governments, or it only operates on the national plane?
Okay, thank you for that question. UNFPA promotes some policies, encourage some policies that can actually address these issues. But ensuring that in all these issues, human rights is respected. UNFPA doesn't advocate to have a law that will limit the number of children and say you cannot have more than this number of children. But on the other hand, what has worked in other countries is, one, raising awareness. An example is South Korea. I met a professor from South Korea and had a discussion with him, and he was explaining to me what happened in 1970s in South Korea, where it became a national it became a national drive where everybody was looking to get the country out of poverty. They said, if you have more than 2 children, you want this country to remain poor forever. And everybody believed in it. And there was no law that said you can't have more than that. You could have as many. But the issue is that people believe that they must do something to get the country out of poverty. It was so strong that right now, the average number of children per woman in South Korea is less than 2. It's very small, 1 point something, because they believe in it through just awareness raising. We need to raise awareness. We raise awareness, it will work. Another issue is that if people are aware of the need to have smaller families, they also need to have family planning services available, because if they are not there, that's not going to happen. As I said, in Nigeria, around 30% of women who want to have family plan, they don't have it. They say, I want to stop, but I continue to have children against my wish. Another issue is that we need to carefully address the issue of maternal and infant mortality. One reason that women or people continue to have children is because they are not sure whether the child is going to live. Insofar as people believe that my child may die, they will continue to have children because it is a probability issue. Once the mortality reduces, they are confident, they know my children are going to live. If I have 2, I'm sure they are going to grow. So we need to invest to reduce infant and maternal mortality. Another issue to address this issue is to invest also in education. We need to, that is human capital. If we put money, instead of putting money in other things, we think infrastructure, no, put money in education, let these people have good education. There's evidence that the higher the education, the lower the fertility rate. It's even in Nigeria, when you analyze those who have higher education, they have smaller families, it's not. And the other issue is, if this is happening, we need to look for sectors that create jobs for young people, sectors that have opportunities, and put more money, economic sectors that will actually absorb these young people. If that happens, then we're able to reap what is called demographic dividend and ensure fertility rate develop. People are using contraceptive and we control. We don't need a law that will tell people that you cannot have this number of children. That law, it can still work, but it is against human rights, and we don't advocate for that.
Okay, Dr. Darma, as we begin to close this discussion, your closing thoughts, you can bring it into this issue I want to raise. In some local communities now in Nigeria, they joke about some street children as born throwaway. People just have children and they don't fend for them. Now, while this discussion has agreed that legislating against numbers of children is out of it, what can any government, local, state, or national government do about such situations where people just throw their children on the street? At least I'm sure legislation can take care of that.
Well, you know, if you have a problem that has multidimensional perspectives, you also need to address it through multidimensionality. One important thing that we need to do is to be able to develop a very coherent, homegrown communication strategy that utilizes our cultural peculiarities in order to sell the message of the danger associated with overpopulation, but importantly, to drive the message of the danger associated with abandoned parental responsibility. The abandoned parental responsibility can be intentional, can be unintentional. Intentional in the sense that some people are just parents biologically, but they don't have the maturity of being parents. Unintentional in the sense that some people that are responsible enough out of deep-rooted poverty have abandoned the parental responsibility. So while you develop that communication strategy, you must also develop policy framework or inclusive policy framework that bring about every single stakeholder in this process: economists, sociologists, demographers, religious leaders, and everybody that matter. So that at the end of the day, once you develop the policy framework and the communication strategy, it is owned by everybody and it becomes a success. But simultaneously also, a developing economy like ours, with an extremely young population, we, the elites, particularly the economic managers, and importantly, the National Economic Council, must be able to revert back to the culture of national development planning, so that at the end of the day, every year, you know how many people are going into the labor force. You have analysis of what are the most employment-absorbing sectors of the economy, how much can you put there, so that at the end of the day, while you are trying to address the reduction in the population growth rate, you are simultaneously creating opportunities for economic engagement, because studies the world over have indicated that men that are actually productively engaged, working 8 to 10 hours per day, they don't have much sex drive, and therefore it automatically reduces their fertility.
All right, Nazir Vidama, thank you very much. Gentlemen, if you can see, we are pressed for time already. I'm sure that this is a matter that will keep coming up, and we hope that Dr. AGK, National Population Commission, and the others will be able to pull this on the front burner. You already talked about your forthcoming conference. We do hope that the subnationals will key into that so that we can begin to make progress. But, of course, there are some very important numbers, again, we would like to repeat just before we leave. From the National Population Commission guest here, Nigeria's population growth rate annually is 3.2%. Fertility per woman, 5.5%. More importantly, the last census that Nigeria had was in 2006. Now, 12 years later, this is 2018, Nigeria's population has grown by 58 million people. So it's on that note, we'd like to thank all our guests who have been with us in the studios this morning discussing this issue. First, we'd like to appreciate the population statistician, who is also the acting director of census from the National Population Commission, Marufu Kolapo. Thanks a lot for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for inviting me.
Also, we'd like to appreciate our regular guest, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Abuja, former Director of National Planning, Dr. Nazifi Darma. Pleasure being with you and having you on the program. Dr. AGK Orji, Chairman Association for the Advancement of Family Planning, and of course that's the CSO for the Focal Point 2020. Thanks a lot for your insights.
Thank you.
Appreciation also to the acting rep of the UNFPA, that's United Nations Population Fund in Nigeria, Dr. Eugene Cogdoy. Thank you for being with us on
Thank you very
Nigeria.
much.
The Nigerian midfielder, John Mikel Obi, honored by FIFA and Super Eagles